behalf of the organizing team, I deep apologies for the time constraints and running late, behind the schedule. And it's my proud privilege to talk a little bit about Dr. Anura V because preparing a brief about his accomplishments is, I found it much more difficult than writing an abstract for a PhD thesis. Of course, as you can see his accomplishments, his very high quality research is quite evident through over 600 publications and being an associate editor of the much sought after American Journal of Clinical Nutrition and being a co-author of guidance book of physiology for medical students. And his deep involvement in research has actually made him member of several government committees through which he has contributed a lot to the advancing field of nutritional science. As you can see, I'm just running through his credentials. Sorry, I'm extremely sorry, sir. My apologies, sincere apologies to you. I'm sure every nutritionist would be always waiting to listen to Dr. Kurpad, and he will be sharing his profound insights into metabolic obesity in the pediatric population, which is a very, very critical topic yet underexplored on various scientific platforms. With this, I welcome Dr. Kurpad.
I'm going to talk to you about some things, some of which might be a little controversial, but it's up to you to think about it and think about how you can contribute to the research going forward. Now, of late, there has been just about 7 months ago an analysis of obesity and overweight in India, and if you look at the graph here, you will see the increase, the little arrows that are there, of overweight and obesity as per the different rounds of the NFHS, and they looked at overweight and obesity in men and women, and you'll see it's increasing in both, to the extent that about 1 in 4 people might be overweight or obese in India. And that's pause for thought. But here's the other thing. If you actually plot onto the same graph the prevalence of obesity or overweight in under 5 children, it's tiny compared to that. It's 1/5 of what's there in adults. And this is the NFHS 5 data, as you might know. And there was another survey that was done a little earlier that was called the CNNS, the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, of over 100,000 children across India, right from 1 year of age to 19 years of age. And they also found that the prevalence of overweight or obesity was relatively tiny. And so you have to ask yourself at this point, is everything okay for children? I mean, look, it's the adults who have to worry. If the children have 4%, let's get in there and let's just stop them from becoming more obese or ever becoming obese. Well, the first sign of worry comes from looking at successive rounds of the NFHS. And this is a paper that was published recently from a group of people in Delhi and Norway, where they showed, and you'll just see very clearly, that the distribution of BMI Z scores is moving to the right. And usually in populations, when you see even a tiny movement like this, it's a cause for big worry. You really want, at the population level, for curves to be fairly static. So we have to think, if this is happening, is there something that's being hidden? Now, there was a term that came out in 1981, many years ago, and there's someone there called Ruderman who actually proposed that there was something called metabolically obese people who had normal weight. So at the time, he called it MONW. And in that, what he said was that these are individuals who have a healthy BMI, but who have metabolic problems. Now, this was in adults. And he said, and he found also that this adult phenotype occurred in almost up to 50% of a population that was studied, particularly in countries like India, China, and Iran. So it was there. This double burden has been there for some time. Now, in LMICs like ours, which are undergoing very, very rapid nutrition transitions, economic transitions, we really, really are missing the boat if we think that we are going to look at the health of our populations by looking at their weight alone or weight for height. We cannot. And here's the problem, that if you look at our surveys in India or anything, anywhere, nobody bothers about taking a little blood sample to measure blood glucose. What we're doing is looking at weight, and we're missing the bus for that. And we really need to understand and ask ourselves, does this occur? Now, we were lucky because in the CNNS, that survey of 100,000 children, we were able to get blood samples in at least half those children, and we then cleaned up the data, and then with a pediatrician called Harshpal Singh Sachdev from Delhi, we actually did this analysis where we looked at about 20,000 children, and it was hard to figure out metabolic syndrome in children. Okay, the standards are not there. It's not like in adults. So what we thought was, let's just look for individual risk factors, like for example, a high fasting blood sugar, or high fats in the blood, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. So you could look at each of these, and each of these, there are standards to say, is it high or not? It doesn't call the child a diabetic or a hypertensive, but it does tell you it's a risk for the child to develop it later. And to our surprise, we found that 50% of the children, this 20,000 sample, had at least one of these risk factors, 1 and 2. Now that tells you that we are sitting on a real volcano of chronic disease that's going to hit this country, because 1 in 2 children has a problem. Now, what was worse was that this occurred in children who had a low BMI, in children who were stunted, in children who were anything, thin. So it wasn't like 1 in 2 went down to 1 in 10. 1 in 2 went up in those children who are already obese. So clearly, it is time for us to think about doing what we call double duty actions. India is always a country which has a big heart. It's generous, it thinks of social problems, it thinks of feeding poor people and taking care of hunger. But it's not thinking of the consequences of untargeted feeding, or at least trying to measure what it's doing when it does its programs. So that's what we would call metabolic obesity in India. It's more than half the children have it. And I'm sorry to say this, but all of you here should think about getting your own blood tested, because don't think it's just BMI that's going to keep you in a safe zone. And this is not just India, it's been reported recently now in 2024 from Mexico as well. And they are finding that there are children there who have high levels of metabolic problems, but they may not look obese or overweight or big. And this is something that we have to get out of our heads, that there is not, we should not be looking for, well, fat's a bad word today, so I won't say it, but plump children. Okay. So this is a problem. There's no consensus for diagnosing metabolic syndrome in children, but nevertheless, there was a paper that came out recently that suggested a definition. Now, I'm not going to argue with you about what's the definition, but here's the point. If you looked at that earlier slide where I showed you 5% of children were overweight or obese, well, if you apply metabolic syndrome definitions, that 5 becomes 12.5. So slowly you begin to see it increasing. So metabolic syndrome is a syndrome definition, but then you go to risk, which is what I talked about in my previous slide, and that risk is in 1 in 2 people. So it's seriously a problem. Now, one reason I would tell you that you should perhaps do some research in this, because we haven't really researched this. We always worry in nutrition that, you know, we don't feed our children well enough, it's not good, they're undernourished, and this is going to have an economic consequence because their brains are not going to develop well enough. It's called a deficit in cognition because of low undernutrition, low micronutrient status. Well, ask the other question. What if there was a possibility that you, in your enthusiasm to overfeed children, could cause overweight. And does that link to a cognitive problem? Well, before that, this is a very complex topic, by the way. The fact is, cognitive development is linked to the household, is linked to the amount of money you have, the education. So let me not try and trivialize it. But there was this study that was done in England of the English adult population, published quite recently, which, after adjusting for several things like smoking and alcohol and drug use and mental disorders, found that IQ did go downwards as the prevalence of obesity went upwards. Now, before the more rotund among you begin to get worried that, am I not that intelligent? Don't worry, because it's not like all studies have shown this. So this is still up there in the air. But it's beginning now to make you think. You're all here. You could do this kind of research. Has anyone done it before in children? Well, yes. There was a study that came out in obesity quite recently, in which they looked at mother-child dyads in what is called the HOME study in Ohio, in the US. And they looked at applying a battery of neuropsychological tests, which I'm sure some of you do in your MSc thesis, where they applied it to measure cognition and IQ, executive function, working memory, visual spatial abilities, and reaction time. Forget the last two. It requires equipment. But the other ones are pen and paper and pencil measurements. And look at the graphs over there. The line that I've drawn on those graphs represents the cutoff to measure overweight. It is +1 SD of the BMI for age. Is that okay? You're always worried about BMI for age being -2 or height for age being -2. I'm now asking you to shift your focus to BMI for age greater than +1 SD. That is called overweight. If it's greater than 2 SD, it's called obese. Now, can you see that there's a trend downwards for most of these tests in children at the age of 5 and 8? This is not being repeated. I think this is a major area for research for all of you, for all of us, that while we look at the problems of cognitive development in undernutrition, I'm not saying for a moment that you stop that. That's very important. But I'm saying there has to be some kind of a thought process to carefully and mindfully feeding children so that you don't push them into the other side, where again the same problems begin to raise their heads. And we need to prove this in India. This is very important. Now, here's the point. You may ask me, oh, well, that's just one study, so who cares? Prove it. Well, you could. You can do animal studies, and there are animal studies, and the papers are here on the right. They've been published in Pediatric Research and in Nature Medicine. And I'm going to tell you that adipose tissue is an inflammatory tissue. It secretes inflammatory cytokines. That is why an adipose baby or child or woman is less likely to absorb iron because she has inflammatory status. So that's why we find obese women tending to have low iron status. Well, it happens to the brain as well. Inflammation can cause low development. It gets better. There's a hormone called ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone. Ghrelin actually improves things in, the area of your brain which is involved in short-term memory to lay down the traces for learning. It's called the hippocampus. And you find that ghrelin improves activity within the hippocampus. And here's the real kicker, and I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying. Have you heard of semaglutide? You've heard of GLP-1 agonists? Now, GLP-1 agonist deficiencies were found to actually work on the hypothalamus and the prefrontal cortex to again change executive reactions in mice. Now here's the problem. This is where you'll misinterpret what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that you to go out and take Wegovy or whatever you want, or Zempic, and say, I'm going to make myself more intelligent while I get thinner. No, it's not going to happen. It's a deficiency that is related to something. Putting more of it in your body doesn't mean you'll become more intelligent. Actually, this is a problem with nutrition in general. A deficiency of nutrients does cause cognitive problems, but putting more nutrients into your body doesn't make you more smart. It just brings you to normal. And the problem is that we all think that by eating, we can make ourselves smarter. No. You should eat well, but it is good education that combines with good food to make for the smarter child. And this is common sense. So before you go away saying, I'm going to go out and get Wegovy for myself, please don't. Okay? You don't want to give it to children either. But there is a biological basis for overweight linking to a poorer cognitive development. Is that enough as a takeaway? Don't overread into it. But I think it's very important, particularly among Madam Mandalika, among all your students, for them to do this sort of research because it's easy to do. It's not that difficult. All right. I just want to give you a primer on obesity now. How much time do I have? I've just finished 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay, I'll go through. All of you think you understand obesity. I thought I understood it. I don't. It's really a difficult topic because you have to ask yourself, in this room, why do we have so many people of different BMI? Why is there such a variability? Why is it that even though we go around telling each other, eat less, exercise more, make better roads, go for a run, we still have inexorably increasing obesity and overweight in this country and all over the world? We just can't stop it. So there's got to be a model for obesity that explains these things. So there are two models. It's called the energy balance model. I don't know, are you aware of this debate that's going on there? There are two ways to treat obesity. One is if you understand an energy balance model, and the other, which has just come up recently, is called the carbohydrate insulin model. And there are two different approaches. Now, energy balance model is very simple. Eat too much, exercise too little, you'll get a positive energy balance, you'll have to store it. So what's the way to solve this? Eat less, exercise more, and you should be better. It's not working. Is it working? How many of you are treating your patients and finding, yeah, it works for a month and then it just goes back to normal? So the energy balance model is this, that there's a food environment that's being created around us that makes us crave food. It is highly, highly tasty food. I mean, I can't tell you the research that goes into flavors and so on. But boy, you can buy food that just makes you buy a packet of chips and you'll just finish it, right? You can't stop. And all that basically means that it pushes up your intake by working on your brain. So the source of your problems is your brain. It's being stimulated by your environment. The only way out is wear blinkers, don't look at anything, don't smell anything, and maybe you'll get better. But it's your brain. And what happens is that your brain, you increase your intake, but your expenditure isn't that high. It just can't keep up with the intake. You know, you eat a samosa, and you just think the amount of exercise you got to do to get rid of that energy is massive. Have any of you tried this? Well, you can't just take a walk around the block. You got to do more than that. So clearly, what you could eat in 10 minutes takes much more time. At the end of it, you're going to be a positive energy balance, and you're going to store the fat in either your adipose tissue or your liver or your muscles. But net, what that does is it creates lower levels of glucose in your bloodstream, and those lower levels of glucose, because you're pushing the glucose into the tissues to store, the lower levels of glucose eventually tell the brain, hey, I'm hungry, eat more. So you are fighting against the system when you give your advice, and there you are telling your patient, you must do this, you must do this. They're nodding at you, but in their brain, it's all screwed up. So you've got to find a way to sort this out. So there was another model. Now, I won't go through this because this is difficult. The point is, this is the advice. Eat less, exercise more. The problem about exercising more is this, that there's this really good bunch of investigators in America who worked in South America and among tribes on the Amazon River and so on. And he's called Herman Ponzer. He really does good work where he's found that you can, if you tell a person exercise more, in theory, they're going to be burning more and more energy, right? So they're going to be losing weight. No, it doesn't happen that way. When you tell people exercise more, you look at the second graph on that side, on this side, you'll see that it goes up to a point and then it plateaus. And one of the things that we found in our clinic when we talked to people, it took us 10 sessions before we got an admission to this. It is like this. It's like a statin. People take the exercise, they go out, they sweat it out, but they come back home and they sit and become a couch potato for the next hour saying, I've done my exercise. So at the end of it, there is these behaviors that are compensatory to what you want. And so there's a plateauing of expenditure. And there goes your advice. You said exercise more, you're going to lose weight. Nope, it'll go up to a point and then it flattens out. This is a major problem, and all of us do this. You take your statins and you think, I can eat anything. And it'll happen with Wegovy as well. You can eat anything. This is the problem about humankind. Right from the time the first oral contraceptive was discovered, it liberated women completely. Behaviors changed. The same thing happens with humans. As we find pills, we change, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily for the better. Not that I'm against any stuff to do with sexual freedom, okay? So, all right. So the CI model is basically that at the center of it is not your brain. At the center of the CI model is the adipocyte, where you have a high GI diet, that is high glycemic index diet, high fructose diet, you have an insulinogenic state. Essentially, when you have high insulin, it forces your fat to get more deposited. You can't liberate fat to oxidize it when you have high insulin. So what we are saying in the CI model is that at the center of this whole problem is not your brain, it's your fat cells. So if you start becoming fat, you're in trouble because that creates hyperinsulinemia, and in turn that reduces mobilization of fat, and eventually it will cause you to eat more, but it is all within that hyperinsulinemic state. So what's the advice you can give someone here? How do you translate this? You translate this into eat less, but mainly eat less carbs. I'm sure all of you have thought this, and this is working for many people, where they find that you change your diet to a low-carb diet and generally eat less, all right? I'm not saying, again, you can eat a mountain of meat or something. No. I'm saying you have to eat less, but eat less carbs. And this is now the carbohydrate insulin model, and this is becoming very, very popular. There's one thing you must know, and it's called de novo lipogenesis. If you eat too much carbs, now here it is. So let me tell you that if you take 200 calories, 2,000 calories per day, I'm sure you advise that to your patients. And of that, you say 60% should be carbs. That means you're asking your patient to eat 300 grams of carbohydrate per day. Fact is, you'll probably only oxidize, if you're pretty much a couch potato sitting in this conference, well, you'll probably oxidize only about 160 grams, including your sleep, everything, over 24 hours. You've got 140 grams extra. What do you do with it? Now, carbohydrate is not easy to store. If you try and store carbohydrate, it forms a gel. Have you ever seen if you thicken a curry with carbohydrate, it suddenly becomes really thick? Well, that's what happens with glycogen in your body. It literally attracts water and it becomes very large volume. And so as a result, you can't store more than a certain amount of carbohydrate, say about 300 grams of carbohydrate. That's it. So what do you do with the rest? You've eaten so much of carbs. The only way for you to do that is to convert it to oil. And there's a simple equation that says about 300 grams of carbs, 270 grams, you want to be really exact, will become 100 grams of fat. It comes down in volume by 1/3. And that oil does not cling on to water. So it's just oil. So it's the most efficient way to store. But here's your problem. You ate too much carbs. You're going to put it into your liver. You're going to synthesize fat. And the important thing is eat less carbs. And if you ask me how much, I would say bring it down to about 150 grams per day. Can you? Think about it. It's not easy. But try and do it, because this is very, very important. 300 grams of carbohydrate per day. Carbs also increases your sympathetic nervous system activity. And we had Dr. Chakma telling us about stress. Yeah, these people will be stressed for many reasons. But one important thing also is that extra carbs they're eating will make you even more stressed. Calm down. Okay? All right. So what's the perspective now? At the end of it, what are you going to do? Here's one big problem you have for children. Do you know that for children, the energy requirement is being overprescribed by you? I'll bet you're looking at the NIN RDA book. By the way, I'm the chair of that committee, so anything wrong with that book is my responsibility. I admit to it. But the point is that I was involved in the WHO's definition of the energy requirements for children. And in that, what we did was we actually looked at an equation that could predict the total energy requirement of children. Total. So just based on weight, you could take a child and you could predict how much they needed. And so if you look at the actual NIN book, there's actually a table given there where based on that equation, you prescribe energy for a child. So your mother comes to you. Are you all using that book, by the way? Please say yes. All right. Now, here's my point, that the way we looked at that was, if you look at the right-hand side, was that we looked at these children as being moderately active. That means they had a physical activity level of 1.8. The fact is most children have a physical activity of 1.5. And if you look at the arrows there, children don't walk to school. They all get into a bus. Children do about 4 hours of sedentary homework TV activity, whereas an active child will only do 2 hours. Children will play games at home or at school, games which are high intense games, for at least 1 hour. The sedentary child won't, because they're doing tuitions. All this means that eventually what you're seeing in the NIN book is for a child that is very active, walking to school and so on. If he's not in the NIN book, please read it further. You will see that we have given another table which is for sedentary children. Now, what's the difference? Very simple. Can you see the last column on that side, the yellow one? The difference is about 300 to 500 calories per day at different ages. For a young child, that's one meal or a good snack. So you got to think, when you prescribe for children, think hard and read that book carefully, because I would suspect that most Indian children require to eat the low activity level rather than the high. That means cut out one snack completely. I don't know if it's easy to do that. The other problem, madam, I'm almost done. I'm coming to the really important part. If you thought what I said was important, this is really important. Now, there is also policy making, and this is not clinical anymore. It's really going to, what are we doing as a country? We have reactive policies. Now, there was a Lancet paper that came out last month in which it looked at what are called Global Nutrition Targets, GNTs. These were set by the World Health Assembly as targets for each country to reach. For example, reduce anemia by half, reduce stunting by half. I mean, it was fantastic, great targets. But when they looked at analyzing what countries had done, actually countries were nowhere near those targets, nowhere near. And this was a major cause for concern. And if you looked at, for India particularly in that paper, they showed that at 2021, they calculated, India's stunting rate was 36%, anemia was 56%, but overweight was much less, 12%. Now you are the policymaker, you're the minister, you see these figures, what are you going to do? You're going to say, feed those children, right? More iron, feed. Why? Because overweight is not a big deal. And this is our problem, because we're not looking at metabolic overweight, we're looking at anthropometric overweight only. And this is the real thing. And I think the problem really in India is this, and came out, if you look at the NFHS or the CNNS, which tracked the growth of children. Can you please look at this arrow which tracks stunting? Children are not born stunted. They're born low birth weight. I have no issues with that. But please don't say children are born stunted. If you look at the Z score of children who are at birth, only about 5 to 7% are below -2. Just about 5. But then in the first 2 years of life, can you see that? It goes up to nearly 40%. After that, it's fairly flat. Now here's your problem. What we do when we look at underweight or stunting is we look at under 5 years. Under 5 years, children have already gone through their first 2 years, they're already stunted. You really can't feed a child to grow more in length after they've already stunted. It's really hard. They're going to grow this way. And that's part, again, of the metabolic obesity problem. So it's very important to prevent stunting. And the only way to prevent stunting is, any ideas? Yes, feed them. These children do not require more protein. Everyone thinks it's protein. No, it's energy. The problem with children, if any of you have tried to feed a child, is it's really hard to get food into their child's mouth after the first 3 teaspoons. It's like they're running away. So you've got to make the food more energy dense. How do you do that? You put in more fat into the food. And if you look at the fat intake of children in India, poor children, it's 7 grams per day. Do you know what the fat requirement is at 1 year of age? 30 to 40 grams per day. So essentially what children eat is, like Dr. Chakmas, I enjoyed your presentation, a lot of cereals, you mix it up into a gruel, you can paste posters on a wall with that, it's gone. And you can't get children to eat it easily. You need to get that food to slide down, you need more fat. And here's the good news, the Women and Child Department, the new portion guidelines, actually the rules are that there has to be fat in the diets of little children below the age of 2 years. That's called a take-home ration that's given to them. It's got to have fat. Up to now, there was no fat in it. It was pure cereals. So that's great. Let's hope it works. Who knows? And so the problem I have is that when we have these global nutrition targets coming out, everyone says, oh no, we got to feed more. Yes, we have to, but please, for little children, it's more fat. For older children, it's less in general. Less carbs, definitely. So there's a varied response to this. But we can't just lump our entire population into a bunch of starving people and then start throwing cereals at them. It doesn't make sense. We are not a refugee camp. We are much better than that. So I think our policies have to be better. And what's good about the ICDS was earlier they should give 500 calories per day. We've reduced it to 400, but more fat. I think that's lovely. It's less volume. They'll eat it. All right. Just one more thing. For anemia, we're giving a lot of iron. Does extra iron lead to obesity? Well, there's this great study done in what is called the NHANES in America, where they found that when you looked at women who had the highest, they looked at ferritin levels. That's the biomarker of iron stores. And generally, in women and men who had the highest quintile of ferritin, the risk of getting diabetes was 4 times. So you pump iron into yourself, you're not doing yourself any favors. You've got to get the right amount in. And in fact, there was a study that was done in Turkey, I think, where they showed that people who give blood, if you go and donate blood as a diabetic, your insulin resistance gets better. You need less. So that's a good thing, right? Maybe we should tell our people, go donate blood. All right. So unfortunately, we are giving a lot of iron in India. In iron, there's a new iron age in India that's going on. And the problem is that in our study of children, again, we found that for every 10 microgram per liter increase in ferritin, the odds of the blood sugar going up was a little up to almost 10%. Don't overdo iron. The key to iron is not to dump more iron in the food, it is to give more fruits to children so that they can absorb that iron, a smaller amount, and it'll be better for them. Are we giving our children fruit? No. So I think there's some thought that must go into it. And this is I don't know if you read the Hindu about a week ago. Dr. Sachdev and myself wrote this article. It was an op-ed in which we said public health nutrition policies need precise targeting. And that is coming from our ability to diagnose metabolic obesity. We're not doing enough. We have to do more. So I'm done. I know you're worried. I'm all done. But this is a poorly diverse diets. Well, I didn't take that long, did I? Poorly diverse diets, too much cereals, excessive chemical micronutrients. We're just fortifying everything, thinking that's the solution. Hello, it's a fruit. Haryana, there's a nice study just published, giving school children 1 fruit, a guava per day. improved iron. It reduced anemia by half. In Telangana, putting a quarter of a guava into the ICDS in the Anganwadi meals reduced anemia. I mean, why are we just throwing iron at? It's not the way to do things. We've got to diversify our diets and do better, and we've got to be more precise. And here's a word I want you to take away with you. We need what we call double duty policies. The policy is to improve undernutrition on one side, but also to reduce overnutrition. That's the double duty. Thank you very much.